Mark, some campaign professionals look at the numbers and say, well, it's not that big a deal because California basically votes Democratic these days. New York basically votes Democratic these days. Texas basically votes Republican. Florida, yes, a toss-up as it ever is. But the Latino vote is heavily concentrated in places where the statewide vote, and thus the Electoral College, is already spoken for. But what in the 2010 census sort of shakes up that analysis?
Well, many states like Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, going back to Florida, but also places in the Southeast like Georgia, like Alabama and South Carolina. While they don't have a large number of Latino voters, or Latino voters won't represent half or more than half of the electorates there, they represent a substantial share, more than 10% in many cases. And that may be enough in a close election to make a difference. So when we talk about the Latino vote, more dispersion, you see more Latino voters in many different parts of the country. But yes, California and Texas are still...
In the Southeast, with those triple-digit increases in many cases, are those people who are either native-born or naturalized persons? Or is a lot of the increase in places like Huntsville, Alabama, the Atlanta metropolitan area, in Virginia, which saw a huge increase, are those people who are immigrants to the United States and not yet participating as voters?
Largely, they're immigrants to the United States. And so, again, in the case of Georgia, while the population of Latinos is about 800,000 in the state of Georgia, only 22% of those are both U.S. citizens and 18 years of age. But again, compare that to other states, the numbers for other states like California, Texas are more like in the 40s. So the population of Georgia, which grew rapidly during the decade, has mostly been on a growth of immigrants and immigrant families moving there. So either people under the age of 18 or folks who are in the U.S. who are immigrants but are not U.S. citizens.
Maria Teresa, what are the rules of thumb that tell you the difference between somebody who's a voter and not a voter? How do people who are in the business of attracting, signing up, energizing young voters, what do they have to do? What's in the toolkit?
The toolkit is to talk to them in a language that's fresh, and that means not necessarily English, but also that's accessible to them. What we found during the 2008 election is that Latinos aren't voting for two reasons. One is that no one's asking them, and number two, they don't think that they have the information that they need in order to make a smart decision at the polls. What happens oftentimes is that politicians, they'll go ahead, they'll do the salsa, the merengue, go in, talk to them, but when it comes to get out the vote, they don't target them. They're actually under-targeted. So what we're doing at Voto Latino is that we're increasing not only the peer-to-peer conversations that we're having, but also inundating them with the message that they need to hear, not from necessarily Voto Latino, but from their peers, and ensuring at the same time that they are informed of what the issues that they care about. The biggest problem right now with the Latino community is that because we are not going to the polls, I always say, is that because we're not at the table, we are the menu. And we need to make sure that we realize that it's not about the Democrats or the Republicans, but it's about the Latino community. Because right now, because again, we're not participating, everybody sees us as a scapegoat. And this election in 2012 is going to be very personal.
There were, Mario, some really ugly chapters written in 05, in 06, in sort of the formative years of the 08 campaign. And I think it's fair to say that the current president's strong showing was in part because of what the Republican Party said in public and out loud during 2006 about Latinos broadly and about immigrants, legal and illegal in particular. Can you undo that? Can you redo that? Can you sort of reset the relationship in 2012?
Well, I think there's no question that there's some individual Republicans and some individual Democrats who said some very nasty things. I think that's, denying that is denying reality. But I think that what you're going to see is a series of individual elections in 2012. Granted, the presidential election is going to impact elections down ballot, but also you're gonna see individual candidates going out and making these decisions, formulating their messaging based around what their districts and what their states look like. I think that the problem for Republicans is an issue of branding. I think that when you have Republican in a safe district that's maybe a highly white district, and he feels that he or she feels that it's okay to go out and say some of these things, I think that has the potential to hurt Republicans in other districts that might be a more competitive district that might have more Latinos in it. So that is going to be a challenge that certainly needs to be addressed.
Alfonso, if you look at the current field of Republican candidates, and it's a pretty big, crowded, and in some ways diverse field, anybody there who's, let's say, educable, who you think has potential to make the kind of appeal that you've been asking for on this program?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the field we're still waiting for some others perhaps to enter the field who have a lot of appeal with Latinos. I think Romney certainly. Even Michelle Bachmann, who in the past has made some unfortunate statements on immigration, but she hasn't been a leader of the anti-immigration effort in Congress. She's a person that, as she becomes viable politically, can certainly move to the center, recognizing the importance of the Latino vote. Look, I agree with Maria Teresa. The era of piñata politics, of here are the mariachis and here's the candidate, it's over. We have a more sophisticated Latino community. It's not yesterday's Latino community. It's very diverse, different socioeconomic backgrounds. The efforts at the end have to be idea-driven. And it's a battle of ideas, and that's good. It's good for the community. But it's also good to recognize that Latinos are independent, that you cannot say, some of the things that you have, a big conclusion as you look at the growth of the Latino community today is that about 40% are foreign-born. That's very different from yesterday's Latino community. That means that they're more socially conservative. They care about issues like life, marriage, and we shouldn't underestimate the importance of those issues for the Latino voter.